to the Foreign Report, your weekly foreign policy show that gives you the gory details of geopolitics with hopefully some laughs along the way. We try to make global news bearable, folks.
And funny. Good luck with that.
Good luck. I'm Seena Ghazidi, your foreign policy curious host. With us is our co-host, comedian, director, Columbia Journalism School grad, Travis Irvine.
That's right, but no Columbia gear today. It's all Henry Zabrowski gear.
I know. I know what I saw.
He knows what he saw. I got the t-shirt, got the hat, all available from lastpodcastmerch.com. I know where my bread is buttered, sir.
He made these after he walked in on me in the bathroom. So
Oh, that's what he saw.
this is what that's from.
I thought it was about aliens.
We are doing a live stream show today. When you see this later today, join our YouTube channel. We're not going to be in Portland. We're going to be doing a live stream show from our respective homes.
Mm-hmm.
So
That'll be fun.
yeah, I cannot wait. You know what we're going to talk about? I'm going to tell you right now. What we're definitely going to talk about?
What are we talking about?
We're definitely going to talk about the Fire Festival.
Okay.
Because that is foreign
Let's
news.
go. Sure, yeah.
It's global news.
It's global news.
So stay tuned. I can't wait.
Foreign policy.
It doesn't belong on this show.
No.
You know, I want we want everyone to be elevated. Live stream, it's going to be crazy.
Yeah. We're going to be Celsius up.
Yeah. ForeignReportShow.com. Sign up for the newsletter. TheForeignReportLPN@gmail.com. So excited. I am pumped for the show today. Travis.
What?
It's all about updates today.
Oh, good.
Lots of updates.
That makes sense. There's so much news. Sometimes you want an update on what's happening.
You know, we want to follow up on these things.
Yeah.
So last weekend, Representative Jim Hines, a Democrat from Connecticut, went on Face the Nation, urging the public release of a September 2nd boat strike footage, and the one we've been talking about, the double tap strike.
The double tap.
He sits on the House Intelligence Committee, and this is a man that has seen years of drone strikes. He has seen some crazy stuff that doesn't see the light of day, and this one rattled him.
Oh, no.
And only a handful of lawmakers saw the September 2nd boat strike footage.
Right.
And Hines is arguing Americans need to see what the U.S. military, full use of the U.S. military power looks like against, quote, two defenseless dudes hanging onto a piece of wood.
Yikes.
All right, there's a little clip I want to play from him talking about this.
Sure.
I mean, oh my God.
I mean, this reminds me of some of the old Iraq War footage where they were showing like literally a guy walking to his car. I mean, but again, like we've covered on this show, they were in a war zone.
Yeah.
So
You're still a combatant.
yeah, if you're on land.
If you're on land. If you're,
Defenseless
swimming.
dude hanging onto a piece of wood.
Oh, boy.
Let's see.
What Secretary Hegseth said at the Reagan Forum Saturday. He described what was happening with these 4 strikes on the alleged drug running boat.
A couple hours later, I was told, hey, there had to be a reattack because there were a couple folks that could still be in the fight, access to radios. There was a link-up point of another potential boat. Drugs were still there. They were actively interacting with them. Had to take that.
They were doing the drugs.
Sounds good.
Does what Hegseth said
good.
match
Okay.
what Admiral Bradley told you?
Well, there was a lot of lack of clarity over exactly what Pete Hegseth's role here was. But Pete Hegseth has no credibility on this matter, right? Remember, a week after this strike, there was a briefing for Congress. Why was a follow-up strike taken? The answer then, in the first week of September, was a follow-up strike was taken because we needed to clear the wreckage so that there wasn't navigation. That was explanation number 1. Explanation number 2, right before we watched the video, was that they might have had a radio and they might have been radioing a boat and they might have been trying to recover the cocaine. And then when you actually watch the video, you realize they don't have a radio. They're barely hanging on and not slipping beneath the waves. Then we get this thing of how they're trying to right the boat. This was about a 40-foot boat that had just been hit with a massive piece of munitions. The conflagration probably destroyed everything in that boat. But, maybe they might have swum under, gotten a radio, probably waterlogged, and radioed a boat that we're not even sure was there. So what we've had is a series of shifting explanations. Oh, and including the fog of war, right?
Don't forget that.
Great documentary.
Because of the fog of war. There
Terrible
was
excuse.
Fog. The military watched this boat very carefully, or I shouldn't even say boat. They watched the wreckage of the boat very carefully for a long period of time before they took the second strike. So look, what Pete Hegseth says about this strike has zero credibility at this point.
Wow. Damn,
Crazy.
dude. And it's like we said last week, sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime.
Yeah.
If you keep shifting your explanation, you done effed up.
They did, and they changed their policies. Now they're going and rescuing people. Now they're going and sending them back to their home country. And just for people, if you didn't listen last week, the U.S. military on September 2nd struck a boat that was carrying cocaine, not fentanyl.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, right?
We still don't even know that.
We still don't know. And by the way, these strikes in and of themselves are presumably, I would say presumptively not legal.
Unconstitutional.
Yeah. And so 11 people were aboard this boat. The first missile destroyed the boat, killed 9 people instantly. 2 survivors were hanging onto debris for 45 minutes to an hour.
Woo.
Survivors were waving at an aircraft overhead, possibly thinking a rescue was coming. And then they ordered a second strike. And so that's the one that killed them. What were they trying to, like, grabbing the cocaine, storing it so they could, like, swim to shore?
Right.
I don't know.
Again, all the explanations don't make sense in any way whatsoever.
Rules of engagement.
Right. Also, who does wet cocaine?
It doesn't work.
I'll tell you who. This guy in college.
This guy, yeah.
He didn't turn out well at all.
No, was he a senator now?
Pete Hegseth.
So the rules of engagement, we all know this by now. I love our audience. You guys know the rules of engagement, right?
Right.
If you're on land and you get shot at or your car blows up, you're still in the battlefield. But if you're at sea and your boat blows up, you are not in the field of battle anymore.
There's no field.
In fact, the military is supposed to rescue you.
Yeah.
If you're an incapacitated combatant.
Right. And then you could question them. There's many things that these survivors actually would have been useful to. Like, did we actually blow up a drug boat or not?
If they wanted to change the rules of engagement, they should have said something like, hey, we're not going to capture the drug traffickers. We're just going to destroy the boats and kill them inside.
Sure.
And then no one said that.
Nobody said that as policy.
So that's the thing. And here's what people really need to understand. If folks think, hey, we got to stop these drug traffickers, the video shows what it looks like when the full power of the U.S. military is turned on. 2 defenseless dudes hanging onto a piece of wood. Mm-hmm. That's it. Mm-hmm. No pirates, no gang of narco Rambos, just 2 guys in the ocean waving at the sky. It's not like they were like, here's the thing that we don't know.
Right.
Were they water polo players? Were they able to, elevate themselves above the current, hold an RPG pointed at U.S. military servicemen?
Right, or even a radio.
Even a radio.
Yeah.
I mean...
Radios don't work when they're wet either, by the way.
They do not
Cocaine
work.
and radios don't work when they're soaking wet.
I'd like to do a poll to see how many of our listeners have used a radio in the last 5 years.
And I'd like to get a poll of how many people have done wet cocaine in the last few years, and then come over to our house to party.
So a little bit of that as an update, but we got even more stuff that we now know.
Uh-oh.
Natasha Bertrand over at CNN drops her own little grenade.
Whoa, let's not use that reference.
Okay, got it.
Truth bomb.
Truth
wait, no,
bomb.
that doesn't work either.
Wait, what?
Fact laser. Okay. All right, let's just. What'd she say?
Yeah. An IED of information she laid on us. The boat wasn't even headed towards the United States. Travis.
Oh, what?
Okay, Admiral.
So it wasn't a cocaine boat headed to Donald Trump Jr.'s house.
No, I mean, you never know. We can't be sure.
Maybe it was indirectly going.
The boat was actually headed to meet a bigger ship marked bound for Suriname. So this was a feeder boat to go to a bigger drug boat that was going to Suriname, a small South American country. And 99% of Americans probably don't know where that is.
Sure. I think most people look at the name of Suriname and think it's just, you mean like my last name?
My last name? Is
my
that
surname?
right? That's a whole country?
Right.
From there, do you know where the drugs usually go?
Again, this
they
is all
go to kill small white women in Texas. No.
Whoa, really?
No.
Okay.
They go to Europe.
Oh.
They go to Europe. They go to Europe.
So they're not even coming here.
And you know where I read that?
Where'd you read that?
Where I read that, Travis?
Where'd you read that?
This website. The U.S. Department of State Oh, let me share the screen.
That's a government website. Right there.
Government website, the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. This is the Suriname summary. And what is it? Suriname is a transit zone for South American cocaine en route to Europe.
Whoa. Okay. So maybe this was a drug boat then, but it just wasn't coming here.
Yeah. I think
again,
we can
all
say,
allegedly. We don't know for sure.
I think we could say there was cocaine on the boat. I'm like willing to give that.
You're comfortable to say that?
I'm comfortable saying there was cocaine on the boat. Again, not fentanyl and not coming to America.
Sure.
All things that we should be taking serious consideration on. And again, I also don't know, and it wouldn't be hard for them to just say, like, I'm over here just guessing, just like they were apparently.
Yeah.
Or they're just not telling us, and they have like a little bit of information and just, making a leap out of a small thing.
Sure.
All right, so that is what was happening there. And so we have this escalating conflict that's happening. The other piece of information they found out is while this boat was traveling, once they saw a U.S. aircraft, the boat actually tried to turn back around towards Venezuela. Because these guys knew, they're like, oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no. Oh no, we gotta go.
We're in the zone.
Yeah, Javi, we gotta go. And all we know is because Hegseth himself says the U.S. had detailed intel on every boat and every person aboard, yet somehow he and the U.S. Navy still made all of these trash, horrible decisions that are if any reasonable person would think is a war crime.
Yikes.
And
even with all the info.
Exactly. And I want to get to a tweet. And last week we also talked about how do you determine if you can believe something or how do you kind of navigate the news environment. And our big thing is if you see someone saying something that you really disagree with, that someone you never agree with is talking.
Right.
And then they say something that aligns with what you think.
Right.
Take a moment.
Yeah, like when Dick Cheney was like, January 6th was bad, I was like, okay.
Okay. This guy?
Go on.
All right. Here is one of the most famous neocons that brought us to the Iraq War, tweeting, if the September boat really had narco-terrorists on board, questioning the survivors would have been a way to learn about how the organization worked, where more drugs were stashed, etc.
That's what we just said.
But this isn't a counterterrorism campaign. It's a shooting gallery with helpless targets. You know who said that? Bill Kristol.
The hilarious comedian from City Slickers?
You bet. Guy that
I see him at LA Clippers games.
The guy that orchestrated us going to the Iraq War.
But yeah, Bill Kristol. I remember seeing Bill Kristol in a documentary about Iraq and war and everything. He literally used to have a fake doll of Saddam Hussein in a coffin on his desk. So this guy loves war.
Loves war.
Yeah.
Loves going after quote unquote bad guys.
Sure.
And getting the bad guys. I mean, he's like, this is not okay.
This is not okay. All right.
So take a minute. Take that for what it's worth, people.
Yeah.
Put that in your cap.
I disagree with Bill Kristol on a lot.
There's almost nothing I agree with him on.
Right.
I don't even like the Clippers. I said it.
How dare you?
I know.
I can't afford Lakers tickets.
I don't go to either, but I'm just saying it. Just because Bill Kristol likes him, I don't like him.
All right. Well, Billy Crystal likes him.
Billy Crystal.
They chant his name there, which is way more fun.
Now I'm
no one will ever chant for this guy unless it's like, to like find him and like give him what he deserves.
Okay, so then Pete Hegseth was also at the Reagan National Defense Forum over the weekend, giving his best alpha male speech.
Right.
He said the, quote, War Department won't waste time on, quote, democracy building and woke moralizing or feckless nation building. He said Trump can take military action, quote, as he sees fit. And he defended the boat strikes.
Okay.
But you know what?
What?
The internet never forgets.
Oh, good. What do you got?
The internet never forgets.
God, sometimes I love the internet.
And you just gotta love it when these things pop up because a video surfaced for when he was Fox host, Pete Hegseth.
Right, the not so distant past.
Talking about Trump's orders being self-serving and that if he ever issued unlawful orders, Trump would throw people under the bus.
No way. Do you have a video of this?
Let's see. All right, here's Pete Hegseth from Fox News. talking about Trump.
Go ahead and kill the families. Go ahead and torture. Go ahead and go further than waterboarding. What happens when people follow those orders or don't follow them? It's not clear that Donald Trump will have their back. Donald Trump is oftentimes about Donald Trump. And so if you're not changing the law and you're just saying it, you create even more ambiguity.
Well, even if he had their back, they'd be in trouble. I mean, you tell me. I had a dad stop me in an airport this morning.
Wow.
Right?
This is on old school. This is when Megyn Kelly was still employed at Fox News.
Yeah.
And that other guy, Carl Higbee, in there, that guy loves war.
It's crazy.
He's crazy. There's so many crazy clips of him from his CNN days.
It's worth noting that both Hegseth and Trump have changed their stories multiple times, Travis, over the last week or so regarding this strike. Of course, the most recent one as well was Monday this week in the Oval Office. There was a press conference on December 8th.
Okay.
When Trump completely denied ever saying that he had, quote, no problem with releasing the video on December 3rd. He flatly told the reporter that he had never said that and accused the ABC reporter of, quote, fake news.
Oh, okay.
5 days apart, wearing the same suit and tie and answering to the exact same reporter.
Well, you know, when you're telling the truth, sometimes you say it differently.
You say it differently. Let's roll that beautiful bean footage.
Woo! Shout out to Bush Beans. Please sponsor us.
This is the December 8th clip first, and then you'll hear December 3rd.
Okay.
Mr. President, you said you would have no problem with releasing the full video of that strike on September 2nd off the coast of Venezuela. Secretary Hegseth now says...
I didn't
say that. I didn't say
You
that.
said that.
This is ABC fake news.
You released video of that
December 3rd.
first boat strike on September 2nd, but not the second video. Will you release video of that strike so that the American people can see for themselves what happened?
I don't know what they have, but whatever they have, we'd certainly release. No problem.
Well, all right. See, he did say, I don't know what they have.
Exactly.
Then something happened the last 5 days where now he knows what they have. And he's like,
whoa.
I never said that.
I never-
You said that. You're fake news.
It's like, no shit, you're not gonna publish it.
Right.
He saw it, he was like, ooh,
Oh,
boy.
that's bad.
Boy.
Oh, even I know that's a war crime.
that's bad.
And I'm dumb.
Ooh.
Damn. Wow. All right, good. It's nice when we have receipts.
Exactly. And then another update on Pete Hegseth. This is all Pete Hegseth heavy A block.
Yo,
here.
2025 has been a Pete Hegseth heavy year.
Too much.
Unfortunately.
Earlier this year, we also talked about Signalgate. What a fun time that was.
Feels like years ago, but it was only a few months.
It was in March.
Yeah.
The Inspector General has now reviewed that entire process, and CENTCOM apparently sent Hegseth 7 secret, not for public release classified emails.
Got it.
Hegseth then copied and pasted those contents into a Signal group chat on his personal phone.
Man, copy and paste.
Copy and paste.
Who are you talking to? The paperclip from... That's who are you
Yeah.
collaborating with?
A journalist, Jeff, what's his name? From The Atlantic.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Goldberg, is that right?
I believe so. Something like that.
A journalist was added to the chat,
Yep, I remember that.
and then the IG report said that this information, if it got out, could have killed U.S. pilots and was wildly dangerous.
Yes. This was out of the Yemen strikes.
Hegseth refused to cooperate with the investigation. He didn't talk. He didn't hand over his phone,
Right.
and then he deleted the Signal conversations, which also is a violation. You have to keep a record of the Pentagon of
Delete
like
records.
record keeping.
Oh, boy.
All right. So if you did this, if any normal soldier did this,
Right.
you're done.
You're done.
Cooked. Out of there.
Court-martialed.
Criminal charges, court-martial. Instead, he's the Secretary of Defense at that time before he became the Secretary of War.
Sure.
And they said this was classified material that he used. The IG also said, technically, Hegseth has the power to declassify information. But sharing strike details on a public messaging app is just stupid.
That's not how to declassify
And he
things.
sent it to his family, too. So did
I
he
remember that.
declassify it to just send it to his family?
I remember that. He just sending it to his, check this out.
So this guy is just full of it.
Man. Woo.
And all of this, wrap it all up in a bow
Let's do it.
for Russia.
It's holiday season, baby.
A gift for Russia.
You got to be kidding me.
So what also happened this week was we've all talked about this America First policy, and I think that you could probably sense an undercurrent of we don't actually know what that actually means. And every year, generally, the U.S. Department of State, I think it's every year, they put out a pretty wonky, here's our U.S. national national security strategy. Right?
Okay.
It's a very wonky document.
Like policy document.
Yeah.
Got it.
But this year was written in like wingdings and made in like the 90s app. What was Kid Pics?
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Sure, yeah.
It was very plain English.
Get the paperclip
Very
guy.
casual.
I love the paperclip guy's back.
Oh, yeah.
From the
he's back.
Microsoft Word.
Basically, it says that the U.S. is stepping back from the global alliance system that literally every administration has helped to support since World War II.
Wow.
And that he said NATO should not expand. And then it also said that great powers should control their spheres of influence, which definitely gets Putin bricked up.
Oh, yeah?
So this also explains why we're focusing on South America all of a sudden.
Oh.
Because this is little Monroe Doctrine-esque that we're just going to worry about our hemisphere and then let everything else happen. Like let Russia have Europe, let China have their part of the world.
Oh,
so
interesting.
spheres of influence.
I see. And that's what you mean by bricked up. You're talking about the BRICS Alliance.
No, I'm talking about a boner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, Brazil, Russia, India, China,
No.
South Africa.
No, Putin's erect.
Oh, okay.
He's fully erect.
I don't know.
He's
That
so
makes-
excited.
He's old. I don't know.
No, I tell you what, he's old, but
This would do it.
This
All right.
United States saying NATO should not expand?
Yeah.
That-
oh, yeah. Oh, Vladimir.
Is this a massage chair? No,
Yeah.
I'm reading a policy paper.
Right.
So obviously Trump is trying to do three things here. Push out Zelensky,
Wow.
protect Putin,
Wow.
and lift sanctions in a way that could benefit his family business interests in Russia and Ukraine. And we could do an entire series on the amount of money that Barron and Don Jr. and Eric
Yeah.
and Tiffany's not making any money.
Oh.
But all of them
What
are
about, what about Lara?
Lara, she's got an album, right?
Yeah,
she's doing just
her
fine.
pop singing career is going
Yeah.
great.
And then all of this is happening. The Polish prime minister, dude, comes on Twitter and he says in Polish, but this is the translation.
Okay.
He said, quote, "Dear American friends, Europe is your closest ally, not your problem.
Whoa.
And we have common enemies. At least that's how it has been for the last 80 years. We need to stick to this. This is the only reasonable strategy of our common security unless something has changed."
Whoa.
Oh, and then there's other like foreign policy guys, like a former U.S. ambassador that was like, everybody chill out. He's going to lose. Like the MAGA thing is losing steam. And we're going to talk about why it's losing steam in the next segment. But you could see here that there's a video that hasn't been released by this administration.
Right.
The Secretary of War of Defense is sharing classified information on Signal, which is now ruled explicitly he sent it.
Right.
The only defense is that he somehow declassified it when he was copying and pasting.
Right. No wonder he had to change his title because he has no defense.
Did he declassify it when it was on the clipboard? Before it got pasted? Or before the copy?
As long as the story keeps changing, we know it's true.
Congress is itching for subpoenas. Russia is celebrating. Europe is panicking. All part of a normal week
Yeah.
here in America.
Wow. Woo. And that's where we are now, huh?
I mean, I know this is a lot of different stuff, but you could see
How it all
works together
And it
and how
connects.
it's all connected.
Yeah.
And it's a mess.
right. And yet it is serving someone's purpose. And that guy is getting bricked up over all this.
Exactly right. Brazil, Russia, okay.
India, China, South Africa. Now South America's a part of it, I guess. I guess
Exactly.
that covers Brazil. All right.
All right, guys. I don't know. I got no words other than I hope that was informative and bearable.
I hope you got bricked up from all that.
Yeah, I hope. If you did, send us an email. We're concerned. When we come back, we're going to talk about this bailout. There's a huge bailout for the farmers. We're going to talk a little bit of a follow-up on the Honduran president getting that pardon. And then really crazy news out of the UN. They have cut their emergency aid budget in half for 2026. But you know what the good news is?
Huh?
There's not going to be any emergencies in 2026.
Okay. I don't
So-
believe you, but okay.
You don't believe me?
No, we'll
Come
find out.
on. Me? We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Foreign Report. I'm Seena Ghazidi. That's Travis Irvine. These are his 3 drinks. We are rocking it out. All water, Celsius, seltzer. I've got my Celsius. Where's the sponsorship?
We're ready. Celsius and Bush beans. If we get all of
listen,
it.
dear people at Celsius, you could have an IV bag up here.
Yeah.
I will hook myself up to it and do a slow drip the whole episode. In fact, I'll do a 12-hour live stream.
And you will. I believe
we're
that.
Going to do maybe 40
to
minutes. Later today, join us for the live stream. I can't wait to do it. It's going to be really fun.
That'll be on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, and we're not in Portland. Okay, I'm sorry. $12 billion farmer bailout. Can you believe this?
I actually do believe it. But go on.
And what would be not a surprise to any Foreign Report listener, or if you're an avid follower of the soybean market.
And you know I am.
The trade war, which apparently is not a trade war. Everything's perfect.
It's not a war, and if it was, I would have ended it.
It's a mess for farmers in America.
Yeah, we've been talking about it for months.
Trump has now promised a $12 billion bailout for those impacted by the trade war with China and the subsequent Argentinian bailout that basically killed any prospects of agricultural sales to China.
Wow.
And by the way, China has now, this was the best thing to happen for China in a way because they're now globalizing their trade routes more than ever.
They're getting soybeans from Brazil and Argentina.
They now have more partners than ever.
Yeah.
So $11 billion has been promised to farmers of row crops like corn, soybeans, cotton, rice, stuff like that, with $1 billion reserved for fruit and vegetable farmers in case that market shits the bed as well.
We all know that's what these markets are going to do.
I don't know what is there a Kalshi bet? Should we do the betting market?
Let's go to Vegas and bet against the soybean market.
Oh,
sure.
God.
I'm sure that's a thing there.
Can you imagine? I'm sure that's happening.
I made money on the Browns, so why not?
You bet on the Browns?
In Vegas, when they went to Vegas and they won.
And they won?
Yeah.
Oh, they beat the Raiders?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That never happened.
I was According to the New York Times, Trump claims the bailout comprises a small portion of the revenue that the United States has been taking in from tariffs and that the use of tariffs have made the payments possible. However,
I don't believe that at all.
Trump's aggressive use of import levies is the primary reason that American farmers need the economic support in the first place.
Right. And who's paying the tariffs? The American consumer.
And the payments are not being funded directly by tariff income, apparently. So it's not even like the money's coming in from the tariffs and they're doing, you know what? They're keeping that tariff money to the side because the Supreme Court needs to rule on that case to see if that money needs to go back into escrow.
Right.
And because remember, he made an emergency order.
Right.
He's using emergency powers to do
make
all
the
this.
tariffs. Yeah.
And so farmers can certainly use the assistance. You know, they're getting cooked obviously right now.
Yeah.
But it's not solving the underlying issue. You know what was also helpful for farmers? When USAID would do development programs in other countries, they would use American farmers to help feed people abroad.
Yeah.
The American government would pay that farmer to send that food abroad.
Yes. Yeah. Foreign policy, domestic policy, all the same thing. They killed the soybean farmers markets big time this year. And I'm going to be, $12 billion, that's not enough. In the first Trump administration, I think they billed them out for $28 billion.
The University of Missouri's Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, a journal that I subscribe to and read every week.
I doubt that.
Is foreseeing a potential $30 billion drop in net farm income for 2026.
Yeah, Ohio's lost $1 billion plus. Tennessee's lost $1 billion. So it's like all 50 states have these farmers and these markets. You'd be looking at, if it's $1 billion per state on average already, $12 billion ain't gonna cover it, man.
It's not gonna.
It's gonna cover the spread.
What if you just, it's like you plug the hole with your fingers in the boat. You
Sure.
know.
And how many fingers do you have?
How many fingers do you have left? Also, more leaks are springing next year.
Yeah.
And so these renegotiated trade deals are not all of a sudden bringing in more demand for American farm goods.
No.
So I don't know how this is going to change. I know. So if I take the other side of this argument, right? His whole thing is it's bad for a short period of time. We can subsidize these guys to weather the storm.
That's what he was. Yeah.
And then they will
eat the tariffs, is what he says.
Yeah, the market will right itself basically, and people will demand
short-term pain
US
for
goods
long-term gain. Trust me, I know.
But the whole thing presumed that people would still want American farm goods.
Sure.
This is not the case.
No, it's because as you just highlighted, China's just like, oh, now we've got all these other great markets. We'll just go there.
Everyone's making a deal with China, and we just gave a bunch of money to Argentina, and we're not buying. We're getting their beef.
They got like $40 billion.
Yeah.
Oy.
So we're not. By the way, you and me, nothing.
No, nothing. No bailouts.
No.
That's tragic. And I read way too much about Ohio agricultural news. I actually do subscribe to the Ohio agricultural news. When you farm, you're taking your profits from the year before to invest in your next year. And so if you have no profits, you're already your next year is effed.
And by the way, the thing we also learned about farmers this year is that it's not like these guys have a little bit of credit card debt. They leverage themselves to buy like giant tractors and a huge amounts of money.
It's expensive.
They are leveraged, and they need this consistent income and this consistent demand to just keep the farm afloat.
Yep.
Like, I tell you what, the farmers aren't buying yachts.
No. Unless you think of a giant tractor as a yacht
It is
that's like in a field.
Yeah, but still cheaper. It's like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure a $12 billion Band-Aid will be fine.
I'm sure we won't hear anything about farmers after this. I'm sure they'll just.
And by the way, and we've said this on the show, these are the same farmers who voted for Trump twice, maybe even 3 times.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, again, in Ohio, red rural counties that have soybean farms voted for this guy. They voted for this.
I hear you saying that, and I am exhausted of
people voting against their own interests.
That, and because my natural state is to have a lot of empathy for people when I feel like they've been defrauded.
Hoodwinked?
Yeah, they've been defrauded.
Yeah.
And I just, my tank is empty because we're all facing these problems now because of it.
Yep.
But, the Democrats are winning a bunch of these special elections, and we're going to see what happins.
If Democrats can start winning in rural areas, that
problem is
the only way things start to shift.
The thing that Trump has showed us is that the executive branch could do so much. Like, so much of our country was run on these like basic norms that everyone was like they are not codified in laws or rules or anything like that.
Right. Norm from Cheers.
Yeah. So like, here's a good example. I was just reading RFK Jr. At HHS, when they have a new policy, they usually have a comment period.
Right.
For people to say like, hey, this is
pretty normal for everything. Normal. Environmental policy. Yeah.
That's not a law. That's just like a regulation that they had and they did because it was good.
Right.
He took that away completely.
Oh, great.
And his thing was that the pharmaceuticals were gaming the comment thing. But there's no other vehicle for commenting on policies from HHS other than the comment period.
Maybe you just... RFK Jr. hates comments because it's so hard for him to talk.
Just get a moderator. Get the last podcast on the left, like Discord moderator, to like go over there.
Tirzo the clown. Yeah. Honestly, Tirzo would already be a better HHS secretary than RFK Jr.
Tirzo in full regalia.
Because Tirzo doesn't talk.
Yeah.
And I don't want to hear RFK Jr. talk anymore.
Oh, God.
Don't get me started.
Tirzo should do like an interpretive recreation of all of RFK's speeches.
It'd just be a lot of honking.
All right, let's get to some more fun news. Honduras.
Also in our hemisphere.
After they heard about this pardon, they've now issued an arrest warrant for Juan Orlando Hernandez.
Wow, this is interesting because we covered this last week.
Yeah.
He's the former president of Honduras.
Yep.
Who got arrested by the U.S. and found guilty.
Right, but
for drug trafficking, but that was in the U.S.
They said it was a Biden thing, but it was like the jury was not all Hunter Biden, bro.
Right. It's just his laptop. Different
laptops that he's had over the years.
He was found guilty by a jury of his laptop peers, of course. So now Honduras, since they're saying, okay, the U.S. won't charge you, we will.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And so Trump pardoned this guy after he accepted millions in bribes and facilitated the smuggling of over 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S. Some would call him a narco-terrorist. Not us, though. No.
And not the Trump administration.
Yeah, apparently. Trump's decision to issue the pardon was grounded in a letter he received from Hernandez comparing his situation to that of Trump by claiming he was also a victim of unfair political prosecution by the Biden administration.
Yeah.
It also didn't hurt that the Trump was delivered by someone special. Travis, can you tell me a little bit about who delivered this?
Yes, it is longtime Trump ally Roger Stone.
Oh.
Who, if you've ever seen the documentary Get Me, Roger Stone on Netflix.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Roger Stone was the very first DC lobbyists to ever turn lobbying into basically a foreign government could bribe his lobbying firm to get access to Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
And that was in the 80s.
Pay for play.
And they invented that. No lobbyist in DC had ever done that.
When you invent a category of fraud, that's talent.
That's something.
I do think people need to watch that documentary because people will be like, no, he's disgusting. He's a terrible person. Yes, all those things are true. But you know what? That's how Trump won.
Sure.
That's it. You got to know how the other side works.
And that's how the culture of DC changed in the Roger Stone era, 70s, 80s, 90s.
And
I am in the special thanks of that documentary because that is how I became knowledgeable of this entire world.
Can you tell people why you got a special thanks? Because there's a lot.
I was working on the crew.
There are conspiracies that you about you and Roger Stone.
Yeah, I basically after Columbia Journalism School, I got a job on the Gary Johnson campaign in 2012, which Roger Stone was an advisor, and then at the same time, this documentary crew was making a documentary about Roger Stone, and I didn't know who Roger Stone was.
Yeah.
I would argue most of America didn't know who Roger Stone was in 2012.
Our lives were better then.
I was like, who's this shitty old guy trying to make jokes with me all the time? And I'm like, so anyway, I got a job working on the documentary and then also working Gary Johnson's campaign, and that's how I got to know Roger Stone.
And then you started filming his swinger parties.
No, that was not allowed.
That was
right. Anyway, so this guy, and that's what's funny is when the documentary came out and I finally saw it, I was like, oh, this guy's terrible.
He's awful.
Yeah, you just like, so you never know who you're working with. But with Roger Stone, I have learned that when he says something, when he says that he didn't do something, that means he actually did do something.
He did it so
So
hard.
he says straight up, and I'm still on his email list, I wanted to unsubscribe after Kamala won.
Yeah.
And then she didn't win. So I was like, well, I better, because when Roger Stone says something, that means 2 or 3 days later, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So this email is way before the pardon even came through, and Roger Stone sent out an email to his supporters, of which I am not one. I am just a journalist. He calls it the case for pardoning former President Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, and he says he took a particular interest in it because it mirrors his own case, a.k.a. Trump's case. And he says straight up, he says, contrary to some of the mainstream media as well as various internet trolls, he always pays attention to the trolls, I was compensated nothing in italics for my advocacy of a pardon for the former Honduran president, which of course means he was given something. If the 1980s and the documentary show, Roger Stone always does gain something.
Yeah.
Not by the goodness of his heart, but because of the fatness of his wallet. Well, so anyway, but yeah, the fact that it came from Roger didn't hurt because he is what they call the Trump whisperer.
It's so insane. So this, folks, I do think you should watch it. Also watch the Diddy documentary. I'm hearing a lot of hilarious things about it. I guess not funny, haha.
Not like haha. Funny
like what we do on the show funny.
Yeah.
Funny like, oh, God, that's crazy. So they're going to issue this arrest warrant. I don't know what's going to happen after that. I actually don't know much about the judicial process in Honduras.
And we still don't even know who won the election.
Yes, we're still waiting. Well, we thought we were going to know by last week.
Because Hernandez's old party, they're tied with, because, they have multiple political parties.
Yeah.
Because they're a real democracy, I guess. But the current administration, the Libra party, they lost big time because they're very unpopular. So it is between Hernandez's old party and then a third political party, the Liberal Party. So, but it's still too close to call.
Well, we'll see.
As of this recording.
We'll see what happens. See if, God, what we got to do.
Pretty wild stuff.
All right, in comedy news, the United Nations has halved their 2026 emergency aid budget. This is very sad, folks. The drastic cuts made by the U.S. and Europe to their foreign aid budgets has put the UN in a position where they need to cut in half their 2026 emergency aid budget. For context, the UN Emergency Aid Fund is dependent on voluntary donations by member nations and serves victims of war and natural disaster around the world, which the UN currently estimates to be approximately 250 million people. So the thing to keep in mind there, too, like right now in I believe the Thailand, the Philippines, and Singapore, there's torrential downpour.
Right, major floods.
Yeah. Like 2004 tsunami level floods.
Woof.
And the United Nations is one of the organizations that would go in and help those people.
Mm-hmm.
In 2025, their goal was to raise $47 billion for the fund. And to date, we're now sitting here December 10th, they've only raised $12 billion.
Hey, that's not, it's nowhere near
what
you want. Yeah. And the year's basically over.
They usually don't get 100%, it seems, but they get closer. In 2024, they got like half the money, so if something like that. And in 2023, 38% of the money that they wanted to get. This is like a fraction of that.
Yeah, that's not enough.
So now they are lowering their goal, and their goal now is down from 47 all the way to $23 billion. And they're being very specific and targeted on who they're going to try to save. And they think it's going to save around 87 million lives. So you could imagine they could have probably saved, I don't know, rough math, double that, almost 200 million lives if they had more money.
Damn. Why does the UN have enough money? Where are they trying to get this?
Well, because we were helping out. We don't view development dollars anymore as a mode of flexing soft power.
So this was yet another cut by the Trump administration.
And then with NATO having to increase their military spending, they also are in a place where they can't give money to the United Nations. They have to spend money on military.
Man.
And so you could look at this and say, hey, we're not America's policemen anymore. You know what I mean? Everyone else needs to do their fair share. But we are arming the whole world.
Right.
And when everyone's got their finger on the trigger, someone will sneeze, and it's going to be bad.
Oof. Don't sneeze with a loaded gun in your hand.
There was a whole press conference about this. So Tom Fletcher, the UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, what a terrible job this guy has.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of Tom Fletcher, my principal at Bexley Middle School.
Is that right? Is this the same guy?
Definitely not.
Probably not. So they were forced to make, he said they were forced to make, quote, excruciating life and death choices. Oh, man. God. Anyone want to go to lunch today?
It's a full crowd there at the UN, I see.
Yeah, look, there are two people in the camera view.
Yeah.
And he's at a...
What is this, one of our comedy shows?
Oh,
Come
God.
on, folks.
There we
Come
go.
see us live.
Here we go.
What do we need in order to save 87 million lives next year?
Oof. Yeah.
We need protection for our work. We need that energetic peacemaking. And we need $23 billion. Of course, we need so much more. But this plan shows how we will spend that first $23 billion of what I'm sure we will raise on the most urgent, prioritized life-saving work. And I know budgets are tight right now. Families everywhere are under strain. But the world spent $2.7 trillion on defense last year, on guns and arms.
Ooh, boom. We've
Just over
talked about
1%
this.
of that. The total global appeal could be fully funded if the global top 10% of earners, that's everyone earning over $100,000, gave just 20 cents a day.
Wow.
87 million lives. That's more than died in the Second World War. The horror of which led to the creation of the UN. So is the UN dead? Tell that to the relatives and the friends of the hundreds of our colleagues who died saving lives this year.
Oh my
Tell
God.
that to the 87 million lives that we will set out to save next year, to those under the bombs, and to those who are losing most in a rules-free, transactional, violent world.
Damn, I'm glad you played that, because that message by Tom Fletcher deserved to be heard by more than just two people in the crowd.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we played that.
That is
$23 billion to save 87 million lives is insane. And I know, like, we've mentioned it on this show recently. It was like, what, like $300 billion could solve all the world's problems, feed everyone, house everyone. And instead, what the governments collectively have spent $2.7 trillion on arms.
Well, if you don't spend on military, you're a socialist.
Isn't any government spending socialism?
Woke mind virus.
Thank you, Hegseth.
God.
Copy and paste your response into my chat, please. Wow.
All right, let's take a quick break. And there's no JD Vance segment, but we do have some news from Ohio this week.
I mean, the good news is that there's no JD Vance news.
This is incredible. We
can still play the jingle,
Does he have like the flu?
You know, my rule is if he's not in my algorithm, I'm not going to go looking for him. So, but I have some other...
I think that's, by the way, a really good rule because that algorithm knows
The algorithm knows, man. You get all my clips on Instagram at 2 a.m. But no, we have other news out of JD's home state and my home state, Ohio, so we'll talk about that.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Foreign Report. Welcome back to the Foreign Report. I'm Seena Ghazidi. Travis Irvine is here. Make sure you stick around later for the live stream.
YouTube.
On the YouTube.
Very exciting. We're going live on YouTube. People have been demanding this for years.
Years.
Decades.
20 years.
80 years. Since the end of World War II.
They've said, Seena, Travis, we need a live stream.
And we will deliver.
Here we go. So no JD Vance, but tell us what's happening in Ohio.
Well, as we know, all domestic policy is foreign policy.
Okay.
Do you remember earlier this week, and this is actually kind of nice that we didn't have to cover it, but there's so many other bonker things we have to cover in A block and B block, so this is getting pushed to C block, but Trump really went after the Somali community.
Okay.
This past week, specifically in Minnesota.
Right.
Because, he's got nothing else to do. Do you want me to tell you what he said? About the Somalis?
Please do.
Yeah, okay. It's a hellhole right now, and the Somalians should be out of here. They destroy our country, and all they do is complain, which is just one of the comments he made about the Somalis. Oh, my God.
By the way, Trump is the king of complaining.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Look in the mirror, sir. You've destroyed our country, and all you do is complain. But, of course, for anyone who doesn't know, Somalia was going through, like a lot of countries in Eastern Africa, a civil war back in the 1990s, and America, run by different people at that time, Republicans and Democrats agreed that we should take in some Somali refugees so they don't have to live in the toils and soils of a civil war. So Minnesota has the highest population of Somali immigrants, refugees who fled from there. Of course, they have Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. So they actually have elected people serving in Minnesota. And the second highest population of Somali immigrants and refugees is actually my hometown, Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
And it's kind of wild that Trump was going off on Somali this week because I actually had a crinkle
What's
the paper.
What is this thing?
We've done this bit before.
Travis brought in some dirty paper.
The Columbus Dispatch, everyone.
It's a newspaper.
It's a newspaper.
Hold on, let me touch it.
This is how news used to be spread.
I can't zoom in on it.
You hear the crinkle, everyone?
Look
at that. Anyway, they actually did a great story on the Columbus immigration boom.
Okay.
The population of Ohio is dwindling, but it's growing in central Ohio. And in central Ohio, especially Columbus, it's actually led by immigrants. And we have about anywhere, the estimates say 30,000, but it could be anywhere between 40 and 60,000 Somali immigrants living in Columbus. And they're making our city better. I actually had the privilege of sitting on a private dinner with our Columbus City Council president before when I was home for Thanksgiving holidays. And we actually have a Somali immigrant, Omar, sitting in front of me. And he's talking about, he pulls out his U.S. passport. He's now a naturalized citizen. How terrified he is. He's like, I carry my passport with me everywhere in this new age of ICE just so I can prove to people I'm an American citizen. And then he had this moment, and it stuck with me, and it stuck with our Columbus City Council President Shannon Hardin, that is this passport even enough?
No,
anymore.
It's not.
And that just, it just like put a chill through the whole room. And this was before Trump was even yelling about the Somalis. And so that really hit everyone hard. And Shannon Hardin had a great post about it on the internet this week, just saying, you know what? He even used the word bullshit. This racist bullshit would not be allowed in Columbus, Ohio. So domestic policy, it's foreign policy, but it's the same thing we keep dealing with the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, Somalis in Minnesota, everywhere. It's like immigrants do make our country better. We are a country of immigrants. I mean, you're proof of this too.
Yeah,
look at you.
Yeah,
you turned out great.
I'm okay.
Maybe button up your shirt a little bit.
Boom, boom, boom.
Or get a Henry Zabrowski on there. But
the one thing I've noticed since Trump, the second term especially, is that we have more politicians cursing, which I've actually always wanted.
Yeah, that is kind of refreshing.
I've never liked my distinguished colleague from the other side. No, call him a fascist prick. You should just do it.
Well, in England, they do yell at each other a lot.
That's what I'm saying. I like it.
They're polite about it, but man, they get intense in some of
the Parliament. You see a little quick clip of those guys in Parliament, and there's screaming at each other and stuff like that. You got to get it out somehow because that's going to connect with us as opposed to like my friend on the other side. No, You're not friends.
Right. No, and that's the thing. Shannon Hardin, he could very well be the next mayor of Columbus, Ohio, but he did. Yeah, it's nice to have people swear, and he was actually swearing a lot in that dinner too, which was nice.
Yeah.
I liked, because you gotta fight fire with fire when it comes to swearing. But he said in his post, Columbus rejects this racist bullshit.
Amen.
Woo.
Amen. Thank you for sharing all that, man.
Hey, foreign policy is domestic policy, and domestic policy is foreign policy. And you know what? I like my immigrant neighbors. I especially like their restaurants.
Yeah.
The food's good. Try the food. That's what Trump needs to do. He needs to eat something besides McDonald's.
I don't care what he eats.
What if he eats shit on the news?
Yeah. Guys, that's the show for today. Next week, we're going to be talking about our predictions for 2026.
Oh, that's right. The year's almost over.
It is almost over, so that means our predictions, I'll tell you what they are right now. Peace.
Oh.
It's going to be... Why are you laughing?
Okay. We're going to end all the wars.
It's going to be fine.
Great.
Prosperity.
I predict we have some special guests to close out the year.
I think so.
How about that? I think my
we're gonna
prediction
have
comes
some
through.
Great guests.
Yeah.
Some great interviews to close out the year. I'm really excited. Hopefully you guys stick around a little bit on the YouTube channel for the live stream. I'm Seena Ghazidi, Travis Irvine. Sign up for the newsletter at foreignreportshow.com, theforeignreportlpn@gmail.com. Send us a note. We'll answer a question maybe on the live stream, but just join us there and we'll see your comments and stuff. Be nice.
Be nice.
Make it bearable, y'all. We'll see you next time.